Hey guys, okay, so this is part 2 out of 3 of chapter 12, which is Forces of Evolutionary Change. And so we're going to keep talking about evolution and a lot of cool stuff today, but I just wanted to make you aware that underneath the YouTube videos, I'm posting information about due dates and things like that that go along with the week that you should be watching this video, okay? So make sure you head over there to the video details section and then post comments underneath the video if you have any questions, and I'll go ahead and answer those in the comments. So I'm going to share screen and we're going to start with the PowerPoint where we left off, which was right here. All right, guys, so evolutionary thought has evolved for centuries, and it first started with Aristotle, who believed that individuals in a species are basically identical and species are unchanging. And of course, we know now that that is entirely untrue. Now, before Buffon came around, we had what is widely known of as special creation. So special creation, sudden appearances of new life, meaning that a currently living species wasn't giving rise to other species. You had new species that were specially created, planned and purposeful, and then that fossils were attempts at life that failed. So yeah. And so from this timeline, everything after special creation was sort of moving further and further away from this idea of special creation. So then we have Buffon. He believed that species change as they spread from their original location, which makes sense because you have, this showed an understanding that in one place you have different selective pressures put on a population than in another environment. Okay, so he was also the first to mention common ancestors between related species, but he had no idea how that would have worked. Okay, well, also because this was hundreds of years away from knowing anything really about genetics and how genes were actually working in their genomes. So then we come to 1809, where Lamarck, he believed that new species come from existing species through environmental forces. Now, this is more or less correct, right? He had no idea how it happened, but he thought changes in individuals' lives could be passed down such that new species could come from them. Now, do we know today that individuals can evolve and pass down what they learned in their life? No. Okay, so for instance, you go to a tanning salon, are you passing that tan trait that you have momentarily down to your offspring? No. Okay, so thought changes in individuals' lives cannot be passed down. Can you teach your offspring thought patterns that you have? Yes. Do new species come from existing species? Yes. Is that through these environmental forces put on different populations? Yes, but it just was a little bit different than he thought. Then we have Lyell. He said that all changes in nature are very gradual, and he was the first to propose that Earth is millions or even hundreds of millions of years old. And of course, now we know that the Earth is really billions of years old. But so he was really this revolutionary sort of thinker by going against the status quo, which said that Earth was a couple hundred years old. And now we know that there's literally no possible way that that is even true. Okay. So he proposed that Earth is millions or hundreds of millions of years old. Now, in 1830, could you imagine how that went over? Not great. So most of these fathers of evolutionary thought were not well appreciated in their times. Then we get to Darwin and Wallace. They are considered the fathers of modern life sciences, and that's because they were naturalists. So Darwin and Wallace, they really traveled the world looking at how differences in different populations were coming about, and they really saw a lot of the natural world and the differences there. But they said, wow, even in very, very different places, they said, wow, this organism, even though it looks slightly different, it also looks really similar to this other bird in this other place. So we'll come to examples about that. in this video, but so they were individuals. They thought that individuals in a population are different and that species arise through the process of natural selection, which of course is the current day thinking. All right, fossils provide evidence for slow change over time. So if we're looking at this mountain, the side of this mountain, you can see these sort of striations in the rock. You can see all of these different sediment layers. Now, if you were to find a fossil at the bottom layers of this rock, that would be older rock, okay? So here you have this sort of timeline. Older rock layers means that you're gonna find older fossils. Things that they might look similar to modern day organisms, or they might look completely different. They might look like things that we do not have around today. Then at the top, you may have fossils of organisms that are really similar to those living today. And you'll more often find fossils of those that are similar living today. Because it's newer rock, you're gonna find these more recent fossils. So fossils of extinct species suggest that living organisms are descended from these common ancestors, these sort of stepwise patterns to going from something that sort of had the same body plan to something that has a really modified body plan now that is super well adapted for its environment. All right, so here we're talking a little bit more about Charles Darwin. Like we said, he was a naturalist. He's considered a father of modern life sciences, and he took this voyage really around the world. In the 1830s, he went on the HMS Beagle, which was a ship, and HMS, this stands for Her Majesty's Ship, the Beagle. It sailed around the world in the 1830s, and he took notes on everything. And so when he reached this island off the coast of South America, and I think it's like, it's really off the coast of like Peru. Okay, so when he reached the Galapagos Islands, what he found is 14 distinct types of finch, okay? Of finches, they were distinguished by like their beak shapes and things, okay? So each different from the birds on the mainland, yet sharing some features. So they were similar in that they're clearly finches, right? But they had very different mouth parts, and that's because the finches on the mainland were eating things that were different from these finches on the Galapagos Islands. And that's because this island, it's too far for them to fly to Peru, unless these are migratory birds, which they aren't. So they're staying on the Galapagos Islands. They're at the mercy of whatever is available for them to eat. Okay, so the birds themselves are very similar, but the beak shape actually depended on their food supply. So Darwin thought that the 14 finch species probably descended from a single common ancestral type of finch. And if you can imagine, okay, you have the Galapagos Islands that were once part of South America, detached, and all of a sudden, species on that island are not able to get to the mainland anymore. So there's none of this sort of interbreeding anymore. You have very different selective pressures on the island than you do on the mainland. So all of a sudden, these species that were once the same, like the same population, they're two separate populations, and they start to diverge from one another because of these selective pressures. Okay, so specifically, the allele frequencies changed based on the selective pressures these populations were under. Okay, and we saw that video on the chapter 1, in the chapter 1 lectures about the finches on the island of Daphne Major, where these finches went through this terrible drought and only the finches with these larger, harder beaks survived. That changed the allele frequency of the finches in the next generation on that population, on that island. All right, so natural selection, much different than artificial selection, okay? So what we know now is that traits are heritable. As long as you have a gene that is encoding a trait, it's heritable, meaning that it can be passed down. Now, if you go and you get a tan, is that heritable? No. If you get your wisdom teeth removed, is that heritable? No. If you get your ears pierced, is that heritable? No. So we can artificially alter these allele frequencies, humans, by selecting traits that we like and sort of mating individuals together, whether it's plants, whether it's dogs, whether it's agriculture, whether it's like whatever it is. So artificial selection, a human chooses desired features, whether that is like a hunting dog who has excellent hearing and excellent sense of smell, excellent eyesight, okay, is really lean and really sporty, I don't know, really athletic, okay? Those dogs are going to be much different from the lap dogs, like a pug or like a Maltese, okay? Would you take a pug or a Maltese to like hunt ducks? No, you wouldn't. All right, so humans choose the desired features, then allows only the individuals that best express those qualities to reproduce with each other. That is changing allele frequencies over generations, but has it happened naturally? No, but we're still seeing this evolution in action. What's amazing is that, all right, you've got lots of examples of this, like vegetables. All right, guys, here is a wild mustard plant. Would you be horrified and amazed to know that this wild mustard plant was artificially selected for in different ways, okay, to make all sorts of types of different vegetables that we know of and eat all the time today, like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, and cabbage. All of these came from artificially selecting the traits that humans wanted out of this wild mustard plant, okay? So for instance, if you wanted to select for a large terminal bud, instead of ending in a flower, you ended in this really leafy, gigantic terminal bud. Or you wanted to select for just leaves on the plants instead of these flowers. You wanted to select for only flowers instead of leaves. You can do that. These cauliflower, okay, and broccoli, more or less, okay, they're these flower clusters, just without the petals. Isn't that amazing? Yes. Brussels sprouts, these are what are called lateral buds. So basically, Brussels sprouts are going to grow in like the crook of every leaf, okay? You get this sort of axillary bud in the nook of every leaf that's going to grow, and you can cause it to grow, and so you select for what now we know of as Brussels sprouts. So each of these, like, you're not going to get a Brussels sprout on a plant that's growing broccoli. So each of these were separate selection events. I hope that makes sense. So you've got vegetables, dog breeds, cat breeds, chickens, cows. So the cabbage and your chickens are genetically modified compared to the ancestral forms of those species. Do you think that, all right, so you go to the grocery store and you're searching for vegetables and you're like, oh, I want to buy organic. Great. But then you go to the chicken aisle and you're picking up packs of chicken that have 2 chicken breasts and they're 2 fucking pounds. Do you think that that's real life? No. Chicken aren't meant to have breasts that are this big, okay? That's human artificial selection. These are genetically modified organisms, and it's just that we've selected for this trait over and over and over again. We've said, hey, this chicken has gigantic breasts. We are going to select that organism because it is going to sell a lot of meat. We are going to make her reproduce and form all these little babies, also with large breasts or whatever. Why isn't this going? All right. So in natural selection, environmental factors cause differential reproductive success of individuals with particular genotypes, meaning that it's not like artificial selection. Artificial selection, you're selecting the traits you want, and you're causing those individuals with those traits to only be the ones to reproduce. Whereas in natural selection, you have all of these individuals in a population, they all have different genotypes. And because of their different genotypes, they also have different traits. Those different traits will make them really well suited, like okay suited, or really not well suited for their particular environments, meaning that some are going to live longer, more healthy, bountiful lives than others. Okay, so that's natural selection. And when you see this word, when I said particular genotypes, remember a genotype is the combination of those alleles that we talked about in the last video. Okay, so for each gene that you have in your body, in all of your cells, every gene you have 2 copies. 1 copy from mom, 1 copy from dad, and those are your different alleles. They can be the same, they can be different. It just depends on who your parents are. All right, so nature selects for reproductive success, meaning that if you have a trait that allows you to survive longer, natural selection is going to reward you by you are going to get eaten less often, you're going to eat more because you're camouflaged, and you're going to reproduce more, meaning that your genes are going to be present more in the next generation. Okay, but this is all based on environmental factors. And do environmental factors stay the same in a population forever? No, they do not stay the same in a population forever. And a great example is called the peppered moth. Okay, so basically what happened is that during the Industrial Revolution, you have a ton of this like soot in the air, this horrible, horrible, horrible pollution. And it is turning the bark of some of these trees from white to black. Okay, and now all of a sudden you have a completely different environment where a white moth used to be able to stick to a birch tree or an aspen tree and blend in, hide away from predators. And now, because of the Industrial Revolution, because humans changed this population's environment, different organisms were succeeding. So we are going to watch this video. I'm going to stop sharing so I can share something else.
How natural selection works, books will often refer to the story of the peppered moth. Here you see how different they can look. The story begins where 80% of the population of peppered moths were white. This worked out really well because they spent most of their time on birch trees that had white barks and camouflaged them from predators. Only about 2% of the moths were born with an odd black color, and this was a bad characteristic to have. The black color made it easy for predators to spot them, and so the black moths had a very difficult time surviving in the environment. But then, in the early 1800s, England's Industrial Revolution changed everything for the moths. Manufacturing started to boom, and more factories developed. Factory smoke and pollutants discolored the white birch trees, and the environmental conditions started to change. The once white trees were now dark and hid the black moths from the dangerous predators. Now the white moths were the unfortunate ones, and the black moths were the ones better suited for survival. Oops. All right. So you can see, they're targeting those white moths. All right, so now the next part, you see me playing this game that is directly related to these moths. And I'm the bird, and I'm hunting down, my prey, and I'm trying to search for moths to eat. You can see that it's far easier for me to find the white moths than it is to catch the black moths. All right, so you see me catching them. You can see me catching them. It really is so much easier. And occasionally I'll get a black moth, and I think looking at it right now, there's a point where I'm like I keep flying over the same black moth that's just sitting there, and I just don't notice it. So I'm chasing, occasionally I'll get the black moth. Right now I'm just targeting on the black moth. There's a white one I catch right away. And so as a result, where we started at 50-50 white and black, right now it's 56% dark moths and 44% white moths, only because I couldn't see the black moths, I couldn't catch them. All right, so the peppered moth, and again, this is in England, the black species rose from started out at 2% and it rose to almost 95% in some areas of England. And this is an example of natural selection. And it shows that the black moths were more fit, as they say. They were stronger. They had a characteristic that better fit their environment. And this is also...
Pausing here. Okay, so when he says more fit, that's what we've been talking about this entire time. If you are able to avoid predators because you blend in better, you are able to eat more. If you're able to eat more, survive longer, you will reproduce more, making you more naturally fit, okay?
An example, a rare example of industrial melanism. And industrial melanism is the idea that an organism will change its color through evolution, through a process, just because of the change in industry and the environment in which it lives. And this all leads us to the concept of Darwin's 4 principles of evolution: variation, inheritance, high population, and finally, differential survival and reproduction, also known as survival of the fittest. One by one, first one, variance or variation, states that all members of a species have differences. So as people, unless you're an identical twin, we all look different from one another. If you see a flock of pigeons, they may all look the same, but they all have their own subtle differences. You may know.
Okay, I'm going to encourage you to go watch the rest of that video yourself, but we are going to talk about each one of these 4 principles of evolution. So we're going to talk about them. If you want to hear the last 2 minutes of this video, please just go. I've posted the PowerPoint. You can find this on YouTube. Okay, I'm going to stop share so I can start share again. Okay, so that pepper moth example of, the Industrial Revolution completely changing these environments, which changed how predators were, looking at these different moths, which over time, over generations, actually changed these allele frequencies in the moth populations. Isn't that incredible? All right, so here are these sort of the logic of natural selection and some of the points that he was just about to make. So some of the observations of nature is that, one, you have that genetic variation that he was just about to talk about. Within a species, you have differences between individuals. Even if these individuals look the same to you, they are not genetically the same, okay? If you have sexually reproducing species, they are not the same, okay? And then in nature, you have limited resources. So every single habitat that has populations of species, you have limited resources, whether it's limited in terms of food availability or spatially limited or whatever it is, or limited numbers of mates, okay? It's limited somehow. Then also in nature, you have these overproduction of offspring, meaning that in a habitat, you are going to have more individuals than that habitat can produce for. More individuals are born than can survive. So you have young dying in every population all the time, okay, because of this overproduction. Then you have different inferences from these observations of nature. One is that there's a struggle for existence. So if you have an overproduction of offspring and limited resources, you will have inherently individuals who are struggling to outcompete with each other for these limited resources so that they can survive. Number 2 is unequal reproductive success. Meaning that because of this genetic variation, because of these limited resources, you're going to have certain individuals who will be well adapted for their environment, even just a little bit. If they are just a little bit better suited, they don't slip up one more time, they're not going to be caught by a predator, they're going to eat more, they're going to reproduce more, their genes are going to be present more in the next generation. And that is natural selection. And then 3, you have descent with modification. So over many generations, natural selection can change characteristics of the population, giving rise to these new species. So over time, you have new species coming about because of selective pressures during natural selection. In this table, guys, I always will highlight what the table is in your textbook. So if you wanted to go and have a look at this for yourself or read about it in your textbook, you can go look for table 12.1, okay? This is insane. All right, so this is a timeline from your textbook that shows how evolutionary things that are contributing to evolutionary theory have occurred within the last 160 years, okay? So about 160 years ago, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. So he was the first to postulate about evolution, about these natural laws governing species, about natural selection. Then in 1865, just 6 years later, Mendel discovers the basic laws of inheritance. Now you have to think that back then, they thought both of these men were completely crazy, okay? Literally thought that they were crazy. Nobody believed in what they were selling. And what's amazing is that Mendel discovered inheritance before they even knew what DNA was, okay? Before they knew the structure, before they could look at it, before they could do anything with it. He discovered the basic laws of inheritance. Decay rates of radioactive isotopes discover that Earth is billions of years old. You have mapping genes onto chromosomes. You have the theory of plate tectonics. Watson and Crick. This is fucking bullshit because you know, and I know, Watson and Crick didn't discover DNA structure. They're credited with the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA's double helical structure. However, they used Rosalind Franklin's notes and preliminary data. So who really discovered the structure of DNA? Rosalind Franklin. Go women. All right, plate tectonics, meaning that the world is physically moving. If the world is physically moving and breaking apart all the time, you're going to have these populations and these habitats changing all the time. Life is classified into 3 different domains. You have evolutions of Darwin's finches with Peter and Rosemary Grant. They're on here. The old couple from chapter 1 with like holes in their pants talking about the island Daphne Major. Large scale genome sequencing. Ongoing research reveals more about the origin of new phenotypes, all of this stuff. What I want you to see, literally all of this happened within the past 160 years. And, oh my God, guys, we just discovered the structure of DNA 70 years ago. 70. Not even 70 years ago. What? Your grandparents were alive when they didn't know the structure of DNA. What? We knew almost nothing about evolution and how it actually physically happened. How like different organisms from like how you and a banana, how much DNA you share, guess what? We only know that very recently, very recently, okay? Because even once we knew the structure of DNA, we couldn't really deduce much about it. So this blows my absolute mind. This blows my absolute mind. I hope that it blows your mind too. This is for you. How is artificial selection different from natural selection? Go ahead and write it down. Go ahead and talk to yourself about it. All right, so in each generation, this is just like the snake example, okay? You got this weird bug that looks like a broken ass leaf. Best camouflaged individuals survive to reproduce. Survive longer, escape predators, eat more, reproduce more. Those alleles that confer camouflage those alleles making it look like this become more common in every single generation. So we get bugs that look like leaves, fish that look like rocks, harmless snakes that look like venomous snakes, and on and on and on, that are perfectly suited for their environments. The more you look like something that is toxic, the more you look like something that's hidden, the more you look like something like and depending on what you are, if you're a plant, the more you look like attractive to a pollinator, all of these things, the more those alleles are going to be present in the next generation. It is like strikingly simple and perfect. The better suited you are for your environment, the more present that will be in your next generation. But does natural selection create those alleles for individuals to benefit from? No, they have to already be present in the population and confer some sort of advantage. So if you had, what am I even trying? I don't have an example for this, okay? But natural selection doesn't create the camouflage alleles, but if something that doesn't have camouflage and something that does have camouflage comes along, I'm getting just like super excited. Something that does not have camouflage and something that does comes along, and one is able to outcompete the other, that will be present in the next generation, okay? Alleles arise by chance, random mutations. All right, natural selection operates on the variation already present in a population. Nothing new at all is introduced by natural selection. And if we go back to those inferences and observations about nature, since more individuals are born than like a habitat has resources to support, the struggle to survive will always be there. You will always have more individuals than a place can hold, than a place can withstand, okay? Just in nature, you have this struggle to survive, and you have certain organisms outcompeting other organisms. Okay, so some individuals in a population are better at surviving and reproducing. If those traits that make them better able to survive and reproduce are heritable, those are called adaptations. And those adaptations are selected for in natural selection. Yes. What if when we spot flies, we're only killing the slow ones? So there's only fast ones left to breed. Duh. You like that one? Yeah. William's listening. All right. I mean, like, we should think about those things, right? All right. So why doesn't natural selection produce one superorganism that is well suited for every single environment? Well, because that doesn't exist. So, like something that makes you advantageous in one environment will not be advantageous in another environment. Those phenotypes are specific to specific areas of the world or specific habitats. So adaptations that seem perfect in one place would be completely wrong for another place. For instance, a lot of people think that humans are superorganisms, okay? And a superorganism is basically this, like an organism that can exist anywhere. Is that true that humans are superorganisms? No. We are not superorganisms. We just have amazing brains that can take us amazing places. Can we live in deep ocean trenches? No, we've hardly even explored deep ocean trenches, okay? Like, can all of us just live at the tip tops of any mountain? No, we cannot. So we're not superorganisms. Humans are not superorganisms. Not even close to superorganisms. It's just that we make things like, think about the animals up on mountains, okay? Are they like, do they have just little bitty hairs on their bodies? No, you would die if it wasn't for a freaking, like, Sherpa coat or something, a down coat. All right, so can a roach live in a hot spring? No. Can a catfish live in the mountains? Can humans live in ocean trenches? No. All right, here's a question that would have been a clicker question, and we're just going to go on with it together. Ferns require moisture in order to reproduce. What will happen to a fern population during a prolonged drought? Is it A, to save the species, some of the ferns will acquire the ability to reproduce without water? Or B, if none of the ferns already have the ability to reproduce without water, the ferns might go extinct. So you might be tempted to say A because B says about ferns going extinct. But in A, to save the species, they will acquire the ability to reproduce without water. Just because something is convenient, can individuals get those sort of advantages? No, you can't. You are working with the variation already present in an environment or in a genome, okay, in a population. So the answer is B. All right, we're gonna stop here and I will make your next one. Y'all have a good day.